This program is brought to you by Monflo, ITAR Innovative Technology, Real Root Supplements, Pro Privacy, Goud 999 en VRB, van eenmanszaak naar BV.
Oh, we got a signal. But they didn't. They ignored it and they just pretended it wasn't there. If a woman had at least one jab before conception, her chances of getting a life-born child was 30% less than if the woman hadn't been vaccinated. So there is certainly an association. Whether there's causality, well, seems like there is. And I was like stunned. I'm like, how can you have someone saying that we're building the freaking airplane while we're flying? But here people will say, oh, that's great, sounds good, just give me the jab. And for me, it was like, it's not that I can't forgive, but I can never trust them again.
They are lying to you and they are controlling you.
That's your answer. We are beyond the tipping point.
During the battle for science in February this year, we brought some of the most courageous and outspoken international voices of our time to the Netherlands. Names such as Del Bigtree, Peter McCullough, Susharit Bhakti, and many others shared their perspectives on the state of science, health, media, and the societal developments we are all witnessing today. In addition to their appearances on stage, we recorded exclusive interviews. In this series, you now have the opportunity to watch these conversations. Today, you can watch Irish scientist and content creator Ivor Cummins, who spoke with a brave doctor, Vibeke Manniche. She defended human rights and medical integrity in Denmark during COVID. But she didn't stop fighting. Even today, she's doing important work by supporting RFK in the US to make America and hopefully also Europe healthy again. Meet Dr. Vibeke Manniche, interviewed by Ivor Cummins.
This is the battle for science.
Hey all, I'm here at Battle for Science conference, sponsored by Lighthouse TV, and I'm just going to have a fascinating chat with Vibeke Manniche, and you were on our panel last night, Vibeke?
Exactly.
Excellent. And we're going to cover, I think, your research on kind of women and children and fertility and the vaccine products, and then maybe move into censorship in science and what you've experienced. And then we'll get on to the wider topics of replication in science, which is pretty dire. But maybe we'll start with your background briefly and your studies you've completed.
Yeah, well, I'm a Danish MD PhD, so I've been a doctor for, half a century or even more, I think, so for many, many years. And public health has been kind of my core interest as a medical doctor for that many years. And we are now a group of independent scientists who has been doing several studies. One of those is within infertility linked to whether you had a COVID-19 vaccination before conception. And we have done some batch studies also. And that's because when it all started with the lockdowns and everything, I looked at the data and I was like, what on earth is going on? The data are smooth. There's no, it's the end of February. We had the first patient in Denmark. And it's like, no, we already knew at that point that there was a seasonal fluctuation. So I was like, what's going on? I mean, there's nothing to worry about. Just keep going. Why have all these lockdowns? So we started to look at the data and haven't stopped since, I would say, because then you had the vaccinations, and which was maniac to go and have a mandate on vaccinating the young ones, the healthy ones, and everyone, because already at that point we knew that people wouldn't fall dead on the street. In Denmark, hardly anyone died because of COVID-19. Someone would die with COVID-19, but that's how it is. Anyways, so one of our studies, we had access to very huge amount of data from the Czech Republic. And what was shown was that, we had the notch in the beginning, in start of 22, January and February. In many countries, not only in Denmark, but in many Western countries, the birth rate declined rapidly, like on a date. So it was like, what's going on? you have usually you have more or less like a fluctuation, but suddenly, literally on a date, like in many countries, not only Denmark, Norway, Sweden, it declined rapidly. And then it's like, what's happening? Well, we know that people, women and men were being vaccinated 9 months, from behind. So what we did was that we got into these data, and what we saw in this very huge amount of data was that the risk, if a woman had at least one jab before conception, her chances of getting a life-born child was 30% less than if the woman hadn't been vaccinated. So there is certainly an association. Whether there's causality, well, seems like there is. And whether it's going to be damage for life or whether it's just going to be for a shorter period of time. Because already at that point, we knew from reported side effects, from studies, that too many women had bleeding disturbances, have like too long a period, too small. So we know that something with the fertility was damaged, you could say, maybe for a shorter period or maybe for life. That we still don't know because we have to follow the data. So that's quite concerning because, you need to have a new generation and you need to have women giving birth to children. And then you could say, well, maybe it's because they were frightened about COVID-19 or about Ukraine or about the climate or whatever. But it doesn't come like that, that you suddenly decide, oh, I'm frightened now, because it just, as I said, almost happened on the same date. And the pattern has continued. So now we have more data from the Czech Republic, and we can see that the trend is still going on. And you can see that if you look at, I suppose also an island, but if you look at the data and the trends, almost every Western country where at least the vaccine amount has been high, they will say that they have a declining fertility rate, less birth than they had beforehand. So I think that's very worrying. And also we had we like data. So we're very keen on having as many data as possible, because once you have lots of data, you can see even small differences. If you only have, Denmark is a small country, but if you only have 6 million population and data from that, it's too little to see trends. Well, we can see the trend of falling, birth rate, but still. So the more data we are having, the better. And in that light, we have also published data on what we call batch dependency on side effects. Nothing to do with the infertility. That's an add-on, you could say. But this batch dependency, that's where we show that your risk of having serious side effects, not only serious, but side effects from the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, very much depends on which batch you had. So either you had that batch, and one of the very bad batches, we call it, was 1 out of 20 who had that batch, which was quite a small batch. This is the Danish data. 1 out of 20 reported side effects. And since we know that reporting side effects are tip of the iceberg, then probably everyone who had that batch had some sort of side effect. That could be just soreness where you had the jab. It could also be serious side effects, and it could also be death. And then you would say, well, which batches was that? And we know that the batches were the batches given in the start, which means in Denmark, it was mainly given, and in Sweden, we replicated on Swedish data and on German data also. But in Denmark, and which was all over, at least in Europe, was given to mainly health professionals, front personnel like police and so on. So the first batches, which was given until around start of April, late March 20, was the so-called bad batches, which means that and this was Pfizer batches mainly we were looking into, means that the manufacturers actually seems to have changed the product along the way, or the storage, or the transportation, or the injection, or everything. And remembering what the vice president from Pfizer said in the early days of the vaccine rollout, she actually said in an article in Nature that they were building the aeroplane while flying. And they certainly were, because that we can see that they changed.
Absolutely. And I worked in GMP and FDA regulated medical device design for many years. And this thing appeared to me, I mean, the amount of oversight was ludicrous. I have a friend who's a senior executive in trial controls in a pharmaceutical company, an MD. And she was just horrified at what was happening. Yeah. So I think it became exposed way back that there was all kinds of DNA and RNA soup in the big biological vats making this. Yeah. All of the authorities stood back because it was an emergency. So, I mean, God knows what was coming through, but the public just think that all of this is high tech, medical. They don't realize it's a joke.
It's a joke, it's a scam.
De uitzendingen van Lighthouse TV bevatten reclames. En ik weet dat sommigen van jullie daar last van hebben. Toch is het belangrijk dat ze er zijn. Want zonder deze inkomsten zou Lighthouse nu niet bestaan. Maar er is goed nieuws. Want vanaf oktober starten we met het Lighthouse Insider account. Daarmee kijk je al onze programma's volledig reclamevrij. Krijg je korting op de webshop, events en krijg je toegang tot de aankoop van een Lighthouse TV token. Een micro-aandeel op de blockchain. Mooie ontwikkelingen dus, maar tot die tijd wil ik je vragen om begrip. Haak niet af als je reclames ziet, maar probeer om te denken. Iedere spot die je ziet helpt Lighthouse TV financieel vooruit. En draagt indirect bij aan ons onafhankelijke en kritische geluid. En dat is keihard nodig. Dank voor je steun.
And I'm always also like, the first time, I still remember when I read that article and I was like stunned. I'm like, how can you have someone saying that we're building the freaking airplane while we're flying? I hate flying. But I mean, if you told me, oh, well, you're going to go on that plane. Well, it's not finished yet, but just go, let's cross fingers you will survive. I would have said, no, you're just going to leave me out. But here people will say, oh, that's great. Sounds good. Just give me the jab. I mean, that I can't understand, because any sane person would have said, how long did it take them to develop that vaccine? 2 months or 3 months. How many did they actually, try it on? Well, 20,000 healthy people. How long did they follow those in 2 months? So it's like, what's going on? What happened with sanity?
Yeah, and the only thing you can say for the Pfizer trial was, technically, unlike most vaccines, it did kind of have a control, like an unaffected group.
Yeah.
But then after a few months, they went in and they took all the control people and gave them the vaccine.
Yeah.
And 6-month follow-up for Pfizer, clearly there were more deaths, not statistically significantly, but a clear trend of more deaths in the vaccine arm. So the whole thing was a farce from the start.
Yeah, but then again, you can say, and that's also interesting, because when we had our first batch study out, which was on Danish data. We replicated on Swedish and German data. But when we had the first batch data out, people would say, no, that couldn't be, and no, they don't believe in that. And they tried actually to have our article retracted, which they didn't manage to. But the thing is, Pfizer had actually themselves reported to EMA in one of those PSUR, but where they have to give feedback to EMA. They actually reported in one of those reports that some of the batches gave many more side effects. And that's because Pfizer knew this. And when we had the first study out, which it was very difficult to have it published, but it came out, I think, March 23. When we first had it out, I thought, okay, let's wait and see if Pfizer's going to come and attack us. No, they kept silent. And that's because it's probably even worse than we have shown,
But I would guess that their senior executives made calls to other authorities to get them to attack you
Yeah, of
indirectly.
course. Oh, yeah, and they did try hard. They certainly did try hard. But eventually, I wouldn't say we won, but I think the journal was brave enough, and we had our arguments very good, and the data was very solid, and it was very transparent. So it was difficult for the journal to retract it. But I think we were like that, not because of the quality of the study, but because of the pressure was so tough on the journal also. But, thank God they didn't retract it, because that would have been a disaster. Because I think this is like, for me, showing that a product has a batch dependency. I mean, now I like to drink Coca-Cola Zero, and if that Coca-Cola Zero has too much salt in it or too little whatever, the minute they realize that, they will withdraw the whole batch.
Yeah.
But here, nothing happened. So, even though the authorities was informed about batch dependency, with any other medication, the minute they realize one batch is bad, they would take it back. And if they realize it's not only one, it's two, it's three, it's four, it's five, then every sane person would say, hang on, we're going to hold it for a second. Let's see if it's that safe. But they didn't. They just kept silent.
No, this was clearly, all the way through the whole madness, it was too big to fail. It had been decided on high.
Yeah.
And all mistakes, all problems, basically they got the word. Don't worry. This is special. You guys, it's okay.
Yeah.
The temporal signal of the introduction of the vaccine, the 9 months, and then the sudden shift. I've heard before the argument, all right, like with the great financial crisis in 2007, 2008, births actually dropped after that because people felt less secure. But in terms of temporal signal, you would expect that births would drop based on the big panic of COVID, March, April 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess you're indicating it was more from the introduction of the vaccines.
Oh, it's definitely the introduction, because you're right. And I said the same. Okay, let's say they frightened, oh my God, we're going to die, all of us. Then it should have been in the start of 21, because, then they didn't make children in 20 and thought, the whole world is falling apart. But nothing happened at that time. But this was like the opposite. So it was exactly January, February 22.
Yeah.
And so, for me, there's no doubt that there's some kind of connection. Then you can say, is it only the jab by itself? Is it the whole, hysteria? I'm not sure, but I definitely know that we have so much evidence about bleeding disturbances, about menstrual disorders and everything, which will have an impact on your fertility. So we do have explanations on how it works and what's the reason for the infertility. What I'm more worried about is that, as I said before, whether it's going to stay like that for that woman who for a while at least lost her fertility, or if it will come back. And just before today, here we meet and talk with everyone, someone showed me from Netherlands some data on fetal losses or fetal death, like the baby dies before it gets born. And also some varying data on what we call the APGAR score. So when you're born, you look at the vital signs for the baby, and it calls APGAR score 1, 5, and 10 minutes after it's born. And they could show that those numbers were falling. So the next thing is, one thing is whether you gave birth to a child. But the next thing which can vary me is whether the children who was born, well, one thing is fetal losses and fetal death, but another thing is whether the children or some of the children which were born was actually not so vital, you could say.
Not thriving.
Not thriving. And that is, of course, the varying part. And then again, if you kind of forget all the madness and remember how we were thinking before the corona scam or the COVID-19 scam, then everyone would have said, hey, hang on. We're going to look at the flip side also. We're going to look at the benefits, but we're also going to look at the risk. But here, for some odd reason, we just forgot everything about the risk. We were not even allowed to talk about it, but the benefits. And that's the other, you can say, spin-off of this is, so if they change the product along the way, which our study shows that they did, and it seems like they agree on that themselves, and they said that, publicly also, then what about efficacy? So they changed the product. So maybe they took out that part which could have protected someone that we don't know.
Absolutely. And just to make it really simple for any viewers, so I have a simple stool of proof with 3 legs. You've got associational data leg. It's not particularly strong, but it's important to observe, as you have. You've got mechanistic evidence, i.e. there are mechanisms that make sense. And then you've got the gold standard, the placebo-controlled trial to prove it. Yeah. Now, here we've got the associational and temporal. We've got the mechanistic. I think there's masses of material about how these vaccines could cause mechanisms to cause these problems.
Yeah.
We're missing the trial because we just don't have the trial.
Op dit exacte moment bewegen er miljoenen onzichtbare frequenties door jouw lichaam en de ruimte om je heen. Radiogolven, wifi, bluetooth, licht en geluid, magnetische velden en misschien zelfs signalen die we nog niet volledig begrijpen. Je ziet ze niet, je hoort ze niet, je voelt ze misschien onbewust, maar wat als ze meer invloed hebben op je leven dan je beseft? Wat is eigenlijk een frequentie? En als alles in het universum trilt, resoneert en een eigen frequentie heeft, welke rol spelen deze onzichtbare krachten dan in ons dagelijks leven? Nou, dat is één van de grote vragen die we gaan onderzoeken tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science op 18 en 19 september dit jaar. Na het grote succes van de Battle for Science in februari, waar de staat van de wetenschap centraal stond, gaan we nu op zoek naar antwoorden op vragen waar de wetenschap geen of nog geen antwoord op heeft. Welke invloed hebben frequenties op ons lichaam, op onze gezondheid, op onze emoties en bewustzijn? En als die invloed er dan is, hoe werkt dat dan? Nou, dat gaan we dus visualiseren. Op grote schermen tonen we live hoe geluid, water, licht en trillingen zich vertalen naar indrukwekkende patronen en vormen. Niet alleen maar om het te zien, maar vooral ook om te leren, te ervaren en te voelen. Laat je dus verrassen door inspirerende lezingen, live-experimenten met onder andere remote viewing, telepathie, tijdreizen, kwantummechanica en sound healing sessies die wetenschap, verwondering en beleving samenbrengen. Met bijzondere gasten zoals de Britse wetenschapper John Stuart Reid, Erik Larakker, Marijn Poels, Baptiste de Paap, professor Pierre Capel, contactee Elena Danaan en vele andere. Stuk voor stuk sprekers die je zullen uitdagen om verder te kijken dan de grenzen van de traditionele wetenschap. Reserveer vandaag nog je ticket en beleef het allemaal op 18 of 19 september tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science. Want alles heeft een frequentie.
Waarom zou je moeilijk doen met allerlei apps, wallets en bankrekeningen als dat in één account kan? Beheer al je euro's en crypto's eenvoudig in één app waarbij je altijd toegang hebt tot jouw geld. En de boodschappen betaal je eenvoudig met de betaalpas die je wereldwijd kunt gebruiken. Ga nu naar www.monflow.com/lighthouse en ontvang ook nog eens een gratis betaalpas.
Werk jij als ondernemer nog vanuit een eenmanszaak of VOF? Heb je een goedlopend bedrijf en maak je winst? Maar voel je je als een hamster in een hamsterrad? Je werkt hard, maar je komt geen stap vooruit. Dan kan dat heel goed kloppen. Want waar een eenmanszaak of VOF een fiscale fuik is en jou als ondernemer klein houdt, is een beschermende BV-structuur juist een fiscaal vliegwiel dat je helpt om iets op te bouwen en te groeien. Want met een beschermende BV-structuur betaal je tot wel 50% minder winstbelasting. Je houdt daardoor veel meer over om weer te investeren en al je bezittingen zijn optimaal beschermd. Wil je weten hoe dit zit voor jouw situatie? Vraag dan nu gratis het e-book aan van eenmanszaak naar de beschermende BV-structuur via vrbadvies.nl.
Pfizer's trial, I'm guessing, with the 26,000, I'm guessing they didn't load it up with a lot of pregnant women? Or?
No, they weren't allowed to have pregnant women.
No.
Actually, they had a small study they came out with, I think, last summer, which they actually ended, I think, in 22, a small study on maybe 160 women, pregnant women, a very small study. They published very long after for some odd reason. And in that study, I mean, it's not worth anything. I literally think it's 160 women. It's nothing. It's a very small number. But what is interesting is that in that you can see that there's more children, a very few, but more children with the vaccinated group being born with handicaps or at the birth. But you can't say that is an association because the numbers are so small. But if it had been the opposite, then of course they was, yell to everyone. Now it shows that it, maybe even protect women or, but it's small numbers. But when you see that very small study that Pfizer themselves, published out or had it, I think it's on CDC's, the website of CDC. Then it's like, how on earth can you, on such a small material, go and recommend for all pregnant women to have this vaccine? I mean, for me, before, even having water from a certain tap, you would say, oh, are you pregnant? Make sure it's from that tap because that tap could be, bad. And now suddenly you don't have any data. And the knowledge you have may be a little of a concern. And then you just, jab any pregnant woman. And I think that's, horrifying.
Absolutely. We live in a zero ethics and science time, basically zero ethics. I mean, it's there's no even pretense. And the irony is they use ethical arguments to suggest that we can't now test vaccines against placebo because ethically we've got a product on the market, so we need to test against that, which is the scam of the century. And it's been done with chemotherapy. It's even being done for blood pressure now. Ethically, we don't want to test against placebo simply because they know it'll fail. But you also mentioned one key topic to finish on. Well, replication in science, the disaster we're in, and censorship also. Maybe those two key things.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is replication. I actually saw that Jay Bhattacharya, the director of NIH, was out to say last week maybe that he thought NIH should support studies where you try and replicate others' findings. And I think that's actually a core in science to try and replicate and see, was that by a coincidence? Did we kind of find something which has nothing to do with the jab, but that it was, a bad weather those days or whatever? And so we actually did replicate our findings on first Swedish data, and it showed exactly the same trend. Exactly, it's officially data, so it's data who's out there. Then we have just replicated on German data. Someone else replicated on Czech data, found the same. We have just replicated ourselves on officially German data and found exactly the same. And which is quite worrying is that we're now submitting a study where we also find that all-cause mortality for all reasons, for all causes, within a range of 3 months after the jab, also has a batch dependency, which I think is obvious it will have, but we have shown that. So which means that the people who had the dangerous batches, you could say, had a higher risk of getting serious side effects, also death within a short period of time. But what our study shows is even within the first 3 months, and maybe even further ahead, but those data we still don't have. And then again, you're back to informed consent. If you were told, well, hey, we don't know anything about how it's going to work, we don't know what's the long-time side effects will be, we don't know if you're going to die of it, we don't know anything, but we only know that this is, cool business, so to speak. Who on earth would say, oh yeah, that's me, I'm going to go for that? I mean, the informed consent, and that's going back to, I'm very upset about all the young people who has been vaccinated. Not only the sportsmen, but also like the population as such. And we have now access to a very huge amount of data from about 60 million data on side effects, reported side effects from all, not only vaccinations, but all medications. And what we can see in those data when we look at the COVID-19 jab and reported side effects, someone thought this is a side effects. We can see that the signal on myocarditis, which everyone knows that's related to the COVID-19 jabs, especially among young men and especially among sportsmen. We can see that the signal started March 21. So March 21, the numbers came rolling into EMA and to the database that this doesn't look good. Even though it's a semi-rare side effect. I mean, for crying out loud, you have young sons yourself. If my sons, which I said, you're not going to have any jab, and if your mother's going to come after you, and he's very afraid of me, so he didn't have a jab. But let's pretend your son had a jab, and you thought you were helping, grandma, which were a big lie, of course. Imagine that you suddenly lose your son. He falls down dead, because of a freaking the jab. I mean, I personally would be so upset, but I would be even more so upset if I knew that the signal was there March 21 and they didn't do anything. Instead, they just did like that. Can't hear anything, don't say anything. And the people who said anything was defamated, smeared, censored, and we can come back to that. So, I mean, if I was that parent or the child who had the myocarditis, didn't die at that time, but had a scar for life in the heart, and which can be fatal, I would be so angry, because I would expect when you have an emergency authorization, which this was the case, that everyone involved would be so keen on looking into the data and following it. Oh, we got a signal. But they didn't. They ignored it, and they just pretended it wasn't there. And the first study we had out, which was literally a published studies, came out in May 21. So actually, you could say, well, this is a signal. But you had the first peer-reviewed study with myocarditis coming out May 21, showing with young men and sportsmen and so on. At that point, everyone should have said, okay, that's it. We're not going to give it to young men. We know it's not doing anything to, with transmission, or young people, or not only young men. We know it's not doing anything to transmission. We know that young people, when they get COVID-19, it's like one cough and that's it. We know they're not threatened in any way. So let's just stop. No, they just kept going.
And unfortunately, I mean, that's the criminality of it. It's a version of the big lie.
Yeah.
So the lie about the COVID vaccine being necessary, effective or safe was so enormous, they could not allow any groups to step out.
Yeah.
Because then a question would be made for another group. Exactly. So this was 100% pure politics. It's criminality.
Je werkt hard en spaart, maar toch klopt er iets niet. Geld op de bank lijkt veilig, maar wordt steeds minder waard. Soms zit de oplossing in iets eenvoudigs. Iets wat al duizenden jaren waarde houdt. Goud en zilver. Bij Goud 999 koop je eenvoudig fysiek edelmetaal. Veilig en op jouw naam opgeslagen in Zwitserland. Meer dan 25.000 spaarders gingen je al voor. Wil je niet alleen sparen, maar ook jouw vermogen beschermen? Ga naar goud999safe.com/lighthouse en ontvang tijdelijk 5 gram zilver cadeau.
Waar komt ons eten vandaan en door wie wordt het gemaakt? Die vraag houdt mij al jaren bezig. Daarom ben ik gaan werken aan mijn eigen natuurlijke productlijn. Met ingrediënten van zorgvuldig geselecteerde boeren en afkomstig van dieren die een goed leven hebben gehad. Bij Real Roots beginnen we niet bij het product, maar bij de bron. We selecteren voedingsrijke ingrediënten uit de puurste leefomgevingen. Van vitamine A tot zink brengen we de kracht van dierlijke voeding samen. Orgaanvlees, bottenbouillon, colostrum, oesters en grasgevoerd rundvlees. in geconcentreerde vorm, zodat deze traditionele voedingsmiddelen op een eenvoudige en logische manier passen binnen een moderne dagelijkse routine. Ik ben Gino, oprichter van Real Roots. En ik geloof in de kracht van de natuur. Ontdek wat echte voedingsstoffen voor jou kunnen betekenen op realroots.nl met code Lighthouse.
Wij staan voor een digitale wereld waarin privacy, veiligheid en vrijheid van meningsuiting de norm zijn. Vind jij dat ook belangrijk? Kom dan nu in actie en ontvang gratis de Pro-Privacy Checklist met bijna 100 praktische tips waarmee je vandaag nog je privacy kunt terugpakken. Ga naar proprivacy.io/checklist.
And I watched with horror the complicity of the medical people. There's a small cadre of truly evil people who ran the operation, but then you've got vast, useful idiots, the believers in medicine.
Lots of those.
Yeah, and that is the big problem. And particularly in the medical business. In Ireland, I remember, it was the medical people and the university professors who were the biggest zealots for vaccines, masks, lockdowns.
Yeah.
So ironically, the relatively higher IQ people in those professions were the worst useful idiots. Quite tragic. We might just close, actually. I think we're drawing close to the time.
I think, you mentioned doctors. I think it's a big embarrassment. I think it's so embarrassing. And at one point, my husband, who's also a doctor, said to me, because we have colleagues which, just went with the flow and which were friends also. And then he said to me at one point, he said, can't you forgive that they were wrong? Can you? And I said, this has nothing to do with forgiveness. This is someone who's like professor in their field, who should be able to read the data, the facts, who should be able to think themselves and should be able to remember, most of all, do no harm. And for me, it was like, it's not that I can't forgive, but I can never trust them again. And I think that is the main issue with doctors who went, because you can say you're not a medical doctor, so you have that excuse that you're not used to. You may be, but I mean, lay people are not used to write or to read scientific journals. They not, and the mechanistic part and all that. So you can have that excuse as a layperson, but as a doctor, there's no excuse, because they should have looked at the data. What I looked at was pure data. It was not like a stomachache. Oh, I have a feeling. It was literally data I just followed. And they should have done the same. Looked at the scientific work, look at all that, but they didn't. Instead, they just followed the herd, you can say.
But the doctors, and again, not even a criticism, in general, if I ask almost any doctor, can you give me a few of your favorite published studies on that topic?
Oh, yeah.
The jaw will drop.
Yeah.
They see the summaries mainly from big pharma or from the medical organizations. So they feel that is their research.
Yeah.
And then they wake up one day when they find out the horror within the system. Oh my God, I was duped.
Yeah.
And some doctors have said those very words to me. When they've gone off and checked themselves, they've come back and said, we were duped.
Yeah.
And they knew we weren't just casually incorrect because everyone got it wrong. They said the word duped.
Yeah.
They know it was intentional.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll, that's a positive note though, maybe, Vibeke, that people now, or at least a massively higher percentage of ordinary people now do distrust the system.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And that is hope for the future, because a huge healthy cynicism has grown since the COVID debacle.
Yes.
And that's what I take some strength from.
Yeah.
Because in 22, I was thinking, where are we going with this? People won't wake up. But now in 26, there's a lot of people, and we see it even in Ireland, the medical staff themselves, there's an horrifically low take-up of even the flu shot.
Yeah,
That's
they're
positive.
declining, that's for sure. And I think you're right. What can vary me, and also I can see that on a personal level, that many people, many of my colleagues will come, not to me, but more to my husband and say, oh, well, we did agree with Vibeke all the time. And, we thought she was right all the time. No, you didn't. No. Or if you did, where were you? Because I was very lonely. But what I still is most worried about is, are they aware of their reluctance? They are reluctant to the vaccines for sure. So is that consciousness that they are, or if it happens again, which it probably will at one point, have they learned from that experience? Will they say no? Because the thing is, the power that the governments had and the authorities, which you can name them who they were, like in a handful, 2 handfuls of people. If we hadn't applied, if we hadn't gone, and said, okay, we're going to jab everyone we see on our ways, doctors, then nothing would have happened. If doctors had said, no, that's not going to be on my watch, that's crazy, then they couldn't. So we gave them the power, you could say, and embodied that by not thinking ourselves. And I still think there needs more than just, and I'm not going to take the jab. I'm still waiting for, it's wrong to say an excuse, but I'm still waiting for people to realize that they were part of that scam themselves, and that they heard that, they damage young people's lives, they damage the fertility of some. That the outcome of it was a disaster. I'm still waiting for that to happen, you could say. But you're right. It's certainly going the right direction, and there's certainly a growing awareness that something was wrong. But still, the censorship, which we spoke about a little, is still there.
Yeah, absolutely. The censorship is there. Not as bad as it was, because in the peak of their rollout of their criminal conspiracy, the censorship was insane. Yeah. Now it's backed off, and the censorship is more targeted on current kind of strategies of the globalists. Yeah. But yeah, I think in general, you're right. People will not admit through shame, they will not admit they were wrong, but they'll vote with their feet. And I think that if they tried another COVID now, it wouldn't work. I think we have a critical mass of people who would kind of say no. Yeah. I hope so. And I also hope, I'm a big fan of everything about the Twitter files, which shown what I knew personally, and you probably also, that we were censored, that we were taking off Twitter. I was kicked out from LinkedIn. I was, censored in Facebook and everywhere. And for me, it was such a big relief when we had the Twitter files showing how immense the censorship was, how Biden paid, billions to the social media, to the media themselves and all that. And I think if anyone questioned whether the censorship was there and how bad it was, they should go and look up the Twitter files. Because for me, that was such a big relief, because I have, personally felt that. I even had, if I put out with our own scientific work, I would be kicked out of LinkedIn, even though it's peer-reviewed and there's nothing bad in it, so to speak. It's public data and all that. So I think everything which has been going on with the Twitter files and showing, and also actually, I know it may be politically incorrect, but also with Trump as president, he has kind of opened the door for free speech. That's how I feel. Then someone may say, well, for others it's not, but at least for what I've been working for, I feel that we have more free speech now in that area, but still a lot to work for, and especially with medical journals also. But I think a little opening, it's not that difficult as it was when we started out. Now we don't have to wait 9 months to have our studies accepted. It gets much quicker, because there is an acceptance that you cannot only look at the benefits, you also need to look at the risks. And having said so, then you need to have the studies, of course, and you need to look at the data. Excellent, Vibeke, and great way to complete it. So here from Battle for Science, Vibeke, delightful to talk to you, and great work.
Op dit exacte moment bewegen er miljoenen onzichtbare frequenties door jouw lichaam en de ruimte om je heen. Radiogolven, wifi, bluetooth, licht en geluid, magnetische velden en misschien zelfs signalen die we nog niet volledig begrijpen. Je ziet ze niet, je hoort ze niet, je voelt ze misschien onbewust, maar wat als ze meer invloed hebben op je leven dan je beseft? Wat is eigenlijk een frequentie? En als alles in het universum trilt, resoneert en een eigen frequentie heeft, welke rol spelen deze onzichtbare krachten dan in ons dagelijks leven? Nou, dat is één van de grote vragen die we gaan onderzoeken tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science op 18 en 19 september dit jaar. Na het grote succes van de Battle for Science in februari, waar de staat van de wetenschap centraal stond, gaan we nu op zoek naar antwoorden op vragen waar de wetenschap geen of nog geen antwoord op heeft. Welke invloed hebben frequenties op ons lichaam, op onze gezondheid, op onze emoties en bewustzijn? En als die invloed er dan is, hoe werkt dat dan? Nou, dat gaan we dus visualiseren. Op grote schermen tonen we live hoe geluid, water, licht en trillingen zich vertalen naar indrukwekkende patronen en vormen. Niet alleen maar om het te zien, maar vooral ook om te leren, te ervaren en te voelen. Laat je dus verrassen door inspirerende lezingen, live-experimenten met onder andere remote viewing, telepathie, tijdreizen, kwantummechanica en soundhealing sessies die wetenschap, verwondering en beleving samenbrengen. Met bijzondere gasten zoals de Britse wetenschapper John Stuart Reid, Erik Larakker, Marijn Poels, Baptiste de Paap, professor Pierre Capel, contactee Elena Danaan en vele andere stuk voor stuk sprekers die je zullen uitdagen om verder te kijken dan de grenzen van de traditionele wetenschap. Reserveer vandaag nog je ticket en beleef het allemaal op 18 of 19 september tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science. Want alles heeft een frequentie.
This program is brought to you by Monflow, ITAR Innovative Technology, Real Root Supplements, Pro-Privacy, Goud 999 en VRB, van eenmanszaak naar BV.